I wanted to speak today about encouragement, and particularly looking at Barnabas and what Barnabas has to teach us about encouragement. It's interesting that Paul and Barnabas were both really significant missionaries in the Bible, in the book of Acts. But if I said to you, who's a great missionary in the Bible, we'd usually think of Paul. And Paul certainly was that. But Barnabas was a very significant figure, and I feel like we can learn a lot from him. And I feel like encouragement is something that we all need and the community needs, and so it's important to have a look at that. Thanks for reading the Bible. That was great. I appreciate that. It's interesting what we learn just in those couple of sentences about Barnabas. So his name was actually Joseph, but like many in the Bible, his name was changed to kind of reflect what his character was. That's quite a significant thing in the Bible. And it's interesting also that he's from Cyprus, which makes sense in terms of him having an affinity with the Gentiles. He was Jewish, but he had that connection outside of Israel. I actually had the chance to go to Cyprus. I only stopped in the airport for a few hours. And when you're in an airport, there's not a whole lot to do. So I went and looked at the shops. It wasn't a big airport. And they had local food products and a lot of samples. And I thought, oh, that's cool. I'll try some of those. It'll fill in the time and fill my stomach. Not necessarily a good thing, but I love Turkish delight. It's one of my favourite treats. And I saw this whole display of samples of all these different Turkish delights, different flavours, and just so as not to discriminate, I tried all the flavours. And being an encourager, I wanted to encourage the lady who sold them. And I said to her, oh, this Turkish delight is delicious. And she just gave me daggers, like her face just clouded over. And because I wasn't stopping in Cyprus, other than the airport, I hadn't learnt much about Cyprus. And I looked it up afterwards and found out that the Turks had actually taken over northern Cyprus. They'd occupied it. So they were kind of the arch enemies of the Cypriots. And she said to me, it's not Turkish delight, it's Cypriot delight, which I didn't even know was a thing, but I learnt that fairly directly. So that was my attempt at encouragement that kind of failed. But we also learned that Barnabas was from the tribe of the Levites. So the tribes of Israel were named after Jacob's sons, or Jacob's name was also changed to Israel. And each of the tribes had their own area of land that they could work and make a living off, except for the Levites. And so the Levites were the priestly group, and so the other tribes tithed money so that the Levites could live off that money, which actually is quite interesting. The fact that Barnabas had land to sell and how he came by that land remains a bit of a mystery. But he was from that priestly group of Levites. And he was known for his encouragement to the extent that they actually changed his name to mean son of encouragement, which is pretty cool, isn't it? It's like if Frank became Muso, his new name was Muso because he's known for his music. Rachel tells me he plays the violin. She likes that, don't you, Rachel? Frank's good on the violin. But he was known for his encouragement. When we first went to Japan, I didn't speak other than 3 words of Japanese. But one of the sentences I quickly learned was, my name is Owen, because that's how you start a conversation. Watashi no namae wa Owen desu. And so I would say that, and Sarah's name was Sarah, so she would say what her name was, and people would just be polite. They'd just say, oh, Sarah, and they'd say welcome. But when I'd say my name was Owen, people would go like this and say, Owen. And I thought, man, I'm a rock star here. I really like Japan. I'm really a hit. These people sort of, quite intuitive. But I asked somebody why do I get that reaction? And apparently Owen means like to cheer, like you would cheer at a sports event. And so I'd always get that reaction, which was kind of fun. And people from Australia, I would just say I'm just a celebrity. That's why they do that, even though they don't know me. But I was actually, Owen can also be loosely translated to mean encouragement. And that was kind of a challenge because I knew that was an ability, a gift that God had given me. And I needed to be conscious of trying to exercise that in Japan. In verse 37, it says that he sold a field and brought the money to the apostles' feet. So he's clearly a really generous and humble guy. Like you notice at sporting events, when a sponsor's donated the prize money, they don't come up to the sports star and get down on their knees and give them the money. They come in with a huge check, the biggest check you can find, and they get them to come up the front and they bang on for about 15 minutes about how great their company is, and then they hand them a check. But that wasn't how Barnabas rolled. He actually got down and laid it at their feet. He was a very humble person as well as being generous. And it's interesting that he was generous with his money, but he was also generous with his words as well. He said very encouraging things to people. And one of the significant things he did was he vouched for Saul, who then became known as Paul. It tells us in Acts 9:26 to 28, after Saul was converted and came to Jerusalem, the disciples were afraid of him. This was 3 years after his conversion. We find that out in Galatians 1 verse 18. So 3 years later, they were still really afraid of Saul. And they had good reason to be. Like Saul's mission in life prior to becoming a Christian was to wipe out as many Christians as he could. I mean, it's like post 9/11, somebody bringing Osama bin Laden along to your small group and say, hey, this is my mate Osama, just make him feel welcome. And you would be a little bit anxious if you're being honest about having somebody with that reputation there. But the fact that Barnabas vouched for him, he said that he'd encountered Jesus, he talked about him preaching really fearlessly, and the disciples, based on Barnabas vouching for him, gave him freedom to move around in Jerusalem. He was really a trusted representative of the disciples. And we see that in Acts 11:22, where it says, news of the conversion of many Greeks in Antioch reached Jerusalem. The Jews were used to their old religion, Judaism, being just for the Jews. And it was a pretty rare thing for a non-Jew to become a member of that religion, though it did happen. So Gentiles coming into this new found faith of Christianity was something they weren't used to and they were a bit wary of. But Barnabas was the guy who they said, go and investigate. So he was clearly a trusted person. So he was somebody who was an encourager, he was generous, and he was humble. I want to look now at the need for encouragement and then the impact of encouragement. And one of the significant needs, I think, for encouragement at the moment is anxiety and uncertainty. There's so much uncertainty at the moment. We're so uncertain about so many things, aren't we? It's hard to even book a trip to Melbourne without knowing whether it's going to go ahead or whether it's going to be a headache. COVID impacts health, it impacts travel, it impacts our economy. Jess and Rachel, our daughters, for my birthday, they paid for us to go away into the hills for a weekend. And we were really excited about it. We cleared our schedules. Josh was going to stay with Jess. And then the 3-day circuit breaker happened right at that weekend. And not a big deal in the scheme of things, but a frustration brought about by COVID. Rachel was meant to come and visit us in April last year, and that got cancelled. And then I was meant to go to the US, and Josh was going to come with me, and we were going to see her in the middle of the year. And then the hardest thing was Jess's wedding was in January, and Rachel was going to be her bridesmaid or matron of honour, and Jess had been in Rachel's wedding. And as little girls, they'd always dreamed of being in each other's weddings, but it didn't happen other than virtually. That's Robo-Rach, as we call her. So Rachel's husband's an electrical engineer, and the money they saved on airfares, he used some to hire this robot that they could control from Seattle. She could move it around at the reception. So not exactly what they had in mind, but it was something. But it was a disappointment for them. In Myanmar, we've had a family that we just evacuated about a week ago, and I was speaking with them during the week, and just incredibly traumatic for them. They lived in this town in the middle of Myanmar, and most of the demonstrations had been in the cities, but the demonstrators kept getting rounded up by the police and the military, and so they decided to spread out into some of the towns. And our worker Jason had taken his 3 and 6-year-old to a local kindergarten, only about 5 minutes away, and he got a call saying the demonstrations have started right near the kindergarten. You need to come and get your kids. And when he got there, the police were on one side firing rubber bullets and tear gas, demonstrators on the other side, and the kindergarten in the middle. And he had to grab his kids, throw them on the back of his motorbike and hightail it out of there with soldiers chasing him. And when they got to Thailand, his son was very upset whenever he saw a policeman or a soldier, because he assumed they were going to shoot at them and chase them. Very, very tough times for a lot of people. A lot of people in countries that we serve in, if you can't go to work, you can't eat. You know, they sell things at marketplaces. There's no government support. So huge levels of uncertainty and anxiety. There was a movie about a year ago called Ready Player One, and people in a slightly futuristic time where life isn't great, and so they live their time virtually, and there's this game that's got an Easter egg in it, and if you can find it, you make a lot of money. And a quote from that movie says, "These days, reality is a bummer." And I think for some people, that's how they feel at the moment. Reality is a bit of a bummer. Online social pressure is a huge discouragement. People feel less than because of what they see online. And it's quite artificial. So I see a picture of Andrew eating this amazing meal, and he might be eating 2-minute noodles the rest of the week. I'm sure that's not the case down here, but it really warps your perspective. Or you see somebody at a party and you think, man, I'm sitting here on my own on the couch, with my trackies on, and these people are out at a party, I'm really missing out. But a lot of it's quite artificial, and yet it makes people feel a bit inferior. And people have all these incredible connections. They have 1,000+ friends on Facebook and over 1,000 followers on Instagram, and yet they have nobody to have a coffee with or to have dinner with. It's kind of sad. There was a pilot called Amelia Earhart, and she was the first female to fly solo across the Atlantic. She actually disappeared circumnavigating the globe in 1937. I don't know if it has anything to do with the fact she sits on the front of the plane like that. I suspect that could be a bit of an issue. But she had this quote. She said, "Being alone is scary, but not as scary as feeling alone." So she spent a lot of time on her own, and she was good with that. But feeling alone, feeling lonely, is a whole different thing. In Japan, so many people were surrounded by people every day on trains, in the city, and yet they were desperately lonely. There were some dating services in Japan that really weren't anything romantic. It was just somebody to spend time with, to hold hands with. There was even a service where you could get a hug. Nothing dodgy about it, just a hug, but people wanted physical contact. Sarah felt prompted to hug a lady that she was discipling, or she led her to faith. And this lady just melted. She hadn't been hugged since she was about 4 years old by her parents. And she talked about them having skinship, the fact they had physical contact. It was just huge. And a lot of people, because of social pressures, they feel really lonely. Then a lack of self-esteem or self-worth is huge as well. Young parents can feel like it's really tough and people aren't really seeing the struggles that they're going through. Students, particularly starting out, people new in a job. There's a movie called Legally Blonde that my daughter's watched about 20,000 times, I could probably recite it to you, and it's this ditzy sort of blonde character, but she's actually quite smart and quite socially aware, and so people always underestimate her. But in the sequel, and it's sad that I even know the story of the sequel, but she worked at a senator's office, and they were all really mean to each other because they're trying to climb over the top of each other. And she brought in a snap cup, and you had to write down something nice for the person and put it in the cup, and then you'd read it out and you'd say, you know, snaps for Andrew because he's a good preacher, or whatever the case may be, to encourage people. And it sounds a bit dorky, and yet people need that sort of encouragement. Sarah talked about the playgroup, and she's had a number of mums that she's gone up to and said, "You're doing a good job." Or sometimes they've asked her whether they're doing the right thing in a particular situation with their kids. And on a number of occasions, after she's told them they're doing a good job, they just cried. Sarah says that's why they cried. There might be more to it. But they're just so overwhelmed that somebody would recognise what they're doing, because they just feel quite insecure. And at this devotions that Sarah gave to the playgroup, she read from Genesis 16:13. Hagar, who was a slave of Sarai, who became Sarah, Abraham's wife, she was running from Sarai because she'd been mistreated after she was pregnant with Abraham's child. So it was Sarai, Sarah's idea, but then she was jealous afterwards. And she was running, and God pursued her and told her to go back, and told her about the baby she was carrying. And it says she gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her. "You are the God who sees me." For she said, "I have now seen the one who sees me." You know, that's a really common expression these days. I see you. I see you. People want to be seen. They want people to know who they are, what they're going through, because often they lack self-esteem. So that's some of the needs for encouragement. Uncertainty, anxiety, online social pressures, lack of self-esteem. But what about the results of encouragement? That's Lyndon Baines Johnson on the right and JFK, John F. Kennedy, on the left. So JFK was the president. When he was assassinated, LBJ became president. I know you like initials here too. Andrew likes ACD for Andrew Cecil Downs. But LBJ had to step up after JFK was assassinated. And he had this quote, which I really like. He said, "Any jackass can kick a door down, but it takes a carpenter to build one." You know, being destructive is really easy. It's a really easy thing to do. I watch some home renovation shows, and one of the things that looks most satisfying is, you know, destroying the old walls and so on. You just rip them all down. You don't need any skills to do that. You just need something to bash with. But to build something, that takes skill. And I think encouragement does two things that I want to look at. One is it strengthens the body, it strengthens the church, and the second is it grows the church. And we see the strengthening of the body through Barnabas. And he did that both directly and indirectly. He directly encouraged the body, but he also did that through encouraging someone like Paul and allowing his ministry to flourish. In Acts 11:23, Barnabas was in Antioch, and it says, "When he arrived and saw what the grace of God had done, he was glad and encouraged them all to remain true to the Lord with all their hearts." That was a pretty huge thing, having this esteemed leader come and just encourage them. Acts 11:25 and 26, straight after that, Barnabas went to Tarsus to look for Saul. And he found him and brought him to Antioch. And so for a whole year, Barnabas and Saul met with the church and taught great numbers of people. And the disciples were called Christians first at Antioch. So as well as directly encouraging them, he brought back Paul, which would have been an encouragement to Paul, but allowed Paul to help encourage them too. And one of the things we're greatly encouraged by is words. We often hear as a child, "Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me." You know, we're encouraged to recite that if somebody's saying mean things to us. And it's true that words won't hurt us directly in a physical sense, but words hurt. We all know that. Words can be very damaging. In Philemon, chapter 1, verse 7, it says, "Your love has given me great joy and encouragement, because you, brother, have refreshed the hearts of the Lord's people." What a great thing that your words could actually refresh people's hearts. Refreshment is something that I feel that we all need, and refreshment of the heart, that's a powerful thing. When I first arrived in Japan, it was really tough. The first 12 months, but particularly the first 6 months, were really hard. We'd left all the people that we loved, we'd left everything that was familiar. Going to the supermarket was hard. We didn't know if we were buying milk or yogurt or flour or sugar or salt. All of those things were challenging. The ministry we thought we were going to be doing, which was more directly with the church, our supervisors wanted us to focus more on teaching English, and that was a challenge. Our girls struggled at Japanese school and kindergarten. Jess used to wake up every morning, and as soon as she realised where she was, she'd start yelling out, "I don't want to go, I don't want to go." She didn't want to go to kindergarten. Now Luke hears that every morning because she doesn't want to go to the RAA. But it was tough. I'd worked as a lawyer. I was paid to communicate. Now I couldn't order a cup of coffee. I felt like an imbecile. I wanted to put my hand up and say I'm not quite as stupid as what I've seen. And Sarah was learning Japanese with this language helper. This lady's name is Mrs. Oishi. And she was at the church plant that we were working at. And I didn't know her all that well. And one day early on, she said to Sarah, "Owen was born to be a missionary." And when Sarah told me that, I thought, she's got no justification for that. She doesn't know me that well, and my greatest joy at that time was looking up airfares back to Australia, just knowing I could book one at any time. And yet, by the same token, I was really encouraged by that. It was just one sentence, but it was such a huge encouragement and helped me to keep going. Pastors and leaders need encouragement, and I really urge you to keep that in mind. As a young adult, I was on a team in the Uniting Church to support a new pastor that was coming in, and we were meant to give him feedback. And most Sundays I'd go up to him after the service and tell him that he'd done a good job with his message, and only because he had. And after a few times he said to me, "I don't really need that feedback, I'm getting plenty of encouragement, but I appreciate it." And a couple of years later he said to me, "You know what, I can really do with that encouragement." He had that honeymoon period at the start, and then it got really tough. And in the church we're often a little too free, I think, to criticise our leaders. I'm not saying that you should never be able to raise concerns, but keep in mind their need for encouragement. So it strengthens the body, but encouragement also grows the church. For those of you that like cricket, Steve Waugh is quite an iconic figure. He was captain of Australia, a great batsman. And Australia went through a period where India was just a nightmare for us. We'd always get defeated in India. It was hot and dusty and sweaty. The ball would spin a lot and we weren't used to spin. And guys like Shane Warne would bring in cans of baked beans and import them because he didn't want to eat the Indian food. They just went there with a really negative attitude. And Steve Waugh, before an Indian tour when they did really well, said, "Attitudes are contagious. Is yours worth catching?" And I thought that was a really profound quote, because encouragement can really spread throughout the body, but also throughout the community. It can have a great impact. In Acts 11:24, referring to Barnabas, it says he was a good man, full of the Holy Spirit and faith, and a great number of people were brought to the Lord. I think it's really cool that it links who Barnabas is with people coming to faith. Encouragement really fuels evangelism and mission. In my role, I've had a lot of chance to be involved in mission strategy discussions, and we throw out lots of different ideas, try lots of different things, but at the end of the day it boils down to relationship. Relationship with the community is what gives you the opportunity to show God's love and also to share God's love. And encouragement is a significant thing in a relationship. The Jews were wary of bringing in Gentiles, but Barnabas endorsed the Gentile church, and that allowed the gospel to go forward amongst the Gentiles and for the Jerusalem's church to really get behind them. He also had a significant impact on John Mark and his ministry in mission. Barnabas wasn't a wimp just because he was an encourager and positive. He wasn't a wimp. Paul didn't want to take John Mark on their second missionary journey because of his previous failures. He was also Barnabas' cousin, so there was that link there. And Barnabas insisted on taking him to the extent that they separated. Paul and Barnabas went their separate ways on this trip. But it got to the point where in Colossians 4:10, Paul mentions John Mark being with him in prison and asks that the church welcome him if he visits them. He'd really turned it around, based, no doubt, in large part on that encouragement. So in terms of application, who do you know who needs encouragement? Who do you know that's feeling anxious or uncertain or feels less than? Who feels unseen or unworthy? Could be a new parent, someone new to the church. When you see someone needing encouragement, often we think about it, it'd be good to fire off an email or send somebody a text, but don't always do it. Hawthorn and North Melbourne had a coach called John Kennedy. His grandson, Josh Kennedy, plays for the Swans. And he was quite a famous coach. He was one of the first coaches that really made fitness a big thing, really got them fit. But one of his famous quotes is, "Don't just think, do." Don't just think, do. And in terms of encouragement, I think that's a good little mantra, that we don't just think about it, but we actually do it. It can have a great impact. Encouraging church leaders, they would really value that. Be a voice of encouragement to those in the community, at work, at school, at uni, in the neighbourhood. That can have a real impact on people. Encouragement is so important to each of us. It's a powerful way that you can strengthen the church and its members, but it's also a powerful way that you can show love to others. You can let them know that they're special, and it may open the door to them understanding how special they are to God. My prayer for each of you is that you would be known as daughters and sons of encouragement. Let's pray. Dear Lord, I just thank you for our brothers and sisters at Aldinga Bay Baptist Church. I thank you for their faithfulness to you over so many years. Lord, I thank you for their heart to reach out with the gospel, to do that in their local community and also to the ends of the earth, Lord. And Lord, I pray that you would encourage each of their hearts today, Lord. I pray that you would strengthen the body, Lord, and that you would also help them to reach out and encourage others and to have the opportunity to share your love to those around them. In your name we pray. Amen.